morning again, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, today's gospel has a lot packed in to just a very few verses. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse 15. So the passage begins, "The Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap Jesus in speech." So the first question is, who are the Pharisees? Now, we know the Pharisees as a group of people that Jesus was always arguing with. But it's important to know that Pharisees were not bad people. Pharisaism was a movement within Judaism that tried to make the faith accessible to the common person. And because in that day, most people were illiterate and could not read and study the Bible, the Pharisees developed a bunch of rules and regulations that they taught to the ordinary person so that they could participate in their faith. Their conflict with Jesus arises because he feels that at times they emphasize the rules of Judaism much more than the love of God. It's not unlike the dispute we're seeing with Pope Francis these days and certain bishops. Pope Francis feels that the church needs to show mercy and kindness and forgiveness to people who can't always comply with the rules, whereas his detractors feel that watering down that would water down our faith. It's not that they're bad people, they just see things differently. The other thing about the Pharisees was that they were fiercely loyal to Judaism and to Israel. And so they resented the fact that their country was occupied by Rome. And they approved of anything that would be in resistance to Rome's occupation. So the passage goes on and says that the Pharisees sent their disciples to Jesus with the Herodians. Now, who are the Herodians? Well, the Herodians were lackeys of King Herod. And King Herod, even though he was in name the king of Israel, was nothing more than a puppet king of Rome. That's how Rome governed in those days. If Herod wanted to be the king, then he had to implement all that Rome wanted him to do. And so Herod and his followers, the Herodians, actually cooperated with Rome and felt that it was a good thing for the Israelites to cooperate with this occupying power, because that would preserve them in the long run. Now, it's interesting that both the Pharisees and the Herodians are approaching Jesus, because the Pharisees and the Herodians wouldn't have otherwise much in common. It's like we're learning today. Politics makes strange bedfellows. So they approach Jesus and they say to him, "Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And you are not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. When someone approaches you and begins with flattery, you are being set up. And Jesus is no fool. He knows that he is being set up. So they say to him, "Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not?" And what they mean by lawful is it consistent with Jewish law for a Jew to pay the Gentile tax? Now, you have to understand what the trap is. If Jesus says, yes, it is lawful to pay the tax, then the Pharisees are going to jump all over him as being disloyal to Judaism and to Israel. But if he says, no, it's not lawful to pay the tax, then the Herodians will jump on him as an upstart and a revolutionary, neither of which Jesus wants to be considered. But Jesus is a bit smart for them. He knows their malice, and he says to them, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin that pays the census tax." Then they handed him the Roman coin. And he said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" They replied, "Caesar's." Now, at this time in history, Tiberius is Caesar, the emperor of Rome. And Tiberius was the son of Caesar Augustus, who you may remember was emperor at the time of Jesus' birth. And after the death of Augustus, Rome proclaimed him to be a god, so that his son Tiberius, ruling as a Caesar, was himself the son of a god. And the Roman coin would have had an inscription to that effect on it, as well as the image of Caesar Tiberius. For a purist, that coin would have been akin to an idol, because it was a graven image made for a false god. And carrying around an idol would have violated the very first commandment, that there shall be no strange gods before me, nor shall you make any graven image unto me. So you see, these purists who want to try to trap Jesus have now themselves just been trapped, because they are carrying around an idol to a false god. And that's why Jesus says, "You hypocrites, you come at me as a purist, and you yourself are breaking the very laws you're asking me about." Now, it's not that the Pharisees and the Herodians were bad people because they carried Roman coins on them. After all, they had to use Roman coins if they were going to engage in the commerce of the day. Jesus calls them hypocrites because they're pretending to be purists in their status as Jews, yet they are engaging in behavior a purist would condemn. You see, the Pharisees and the Herodians, just like all of us, lived in a messy world. It's not easy to be perfect in an imperfect world. And Jesus' answer, then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God, isn't really much help, because it only raises the question, what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God? Now, whenever I come across this story, I often think of taking the bar exam 100 years ago. Now, the bar exam was a 2-day exam. The first day was all essay writing to a bunch of questions. And the second day was all about answering multiple choice questions. And you might think that because it's only multiple choice, that was the easy part of the test. Well, I've got news for you. The way that part of the test worked is that they would give you a fact situation, and then they ask you a legal question at the end of those facts. And you say, great, I know the answer to that question. But then when you look at the 4 choices they gave you, the answer was not among them. You see, because the bar exam is not testing whether you know the right answer. The bar exam is testing whether you can choose the best answer. And there's a big difference. You know, so often in life when we face dilemmas and we look at the available choices that we have, we don't always see the right answer on the list. And we're forced to choose among possibilities that we'd rather not have. But nonetheless, they're our only choices. And that's what it means to live in a messy world. It means that we can't be high and mighty purists, ready to judge others based on some perfect standards that just are not realistic in a complex world. It means that most of us don't have the luxury of structuring the world around us so that we can organize our choices into nice and neat categories of good versus bad. It means that when we face the messiness of life, we can't opt out of the difficult decisions that face us. But we have to engage the world in all of its messiness. So rather than judging people like the Herodians and the Pharisees, we are called to live with integrity and compassion like Jesus. Integrity with respect to the moral principles on which we base our decisions, realizing that nothing is pure in life. And compassion for others and even ourselves, recognizing that sometimes all we can really do is make the best choice available in a complicated situation. You see, God doesn't always insist that we be right. God only expects that we do the best we can, given the cards we have been dealt. And you see, that's all Jesus could do in answering the Pharisees and the Herodians. Instead of pitting God against Caesar in some sort of either-or purist world, Jesus answers his challengers by making room for both. Repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. It's a clever answer, even though it's not very neat and clean. Because we'll always wonder what is God's and what is Caesar's. But maybe that's Jesus' very point. The world is messy, and it's unreasonable for us to be purists and judge others by purist standards. Instead, we're called to live life fully with integrity and compassion, just doing the best we can. Amen. Amen.